All right, welcome to the session tonight. Let me share. I want to get right into what I didn't get to last week because I wanted more people in attendance. So it doesn't look like we accomplished that necessarily, but we need to move down. It's not the one. As we continue our discussion about curriculum emphasis on the rigor, relevance, and relationship concept, I included this piece in terms of environmental behaviors that are impacted by the curriculum itself, but also impacted by behaviors of those learners within that setting. And we're actually looking at uh, seven areas: equity, expectations, learner self-efficacy, engagement, peer and self-monitoring relationships, and digital learning. So as we go through this, we're going to have those seven areas covered with some subcategories or sub areas within that. And the first one is deals with learner equity is provided and sustained. I got a little video to sort of introduce that concept. Don't stream on me.
Hey, Mr. Q. Did you see that? Why would somebody do that?
Please go into the classroom, no talking, quiet reading.
Hey, Miss Brown, how you doing?
We need you inside.
How do you think that makes us feel? I forgot my number. What's your name? Jordan. What's your last name? Carter. Okay. School is hard enough.
Go ahead and sit down quietly at your desk and begin writing.
This kind of stuff just makes it harder.
I said quietly, please. Who's talking? Is it you, Sophie? Don't let it be you.
Don't believe me? Please just watch.
I'm not up here for me, I'm up here for you. Pay attention. Okay? Now somebody answer me. Somebody needs to answer me really fast.
Every time we're ignored or yelled at or silenced, the teacher takes away what's possible.
No horseplay, no running, and especially no talking.
Moment by moment.
Gary, your students' behavior yesterday in the lunchroom was terrible. Next time, silent lunch. Did you hear that? Stay in line and catch a bubble. I'm not playing.
If this is education, we're in trouble. Bye, Miss McGarrity. Frederick Douglass said, once you learn to read, you'll be forever free. The way it is now, 2 of the 3 of us will never be able to really read. It doesn't have to be this way.
Hey, Jordan, how you doing? Good.
Everyone we meet throughout our day can make a difference.
I've been waiting for you to arrive.
All the difference.
Good morning, Jordan.
How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. How are you?
Good.
Go ahead, what's your number is?
Talk with us, not at us.
That's okay. I'll look it up for you. Go ahead, sweetheart.
Okay.
All right.
Teach us what we need to know. That's how we get smarter.
Well, good morning, Sophie, Jalecia, and Jordan.
And when you talk with us and teach us, give us bigger and bigger words.
Now what I'd like you to do, children, is turn around and converse with your neighbor and discuss where the mother might have gone.
Words that we can use to read and understand.
She prayed for evil, so she comes that night.
And that will take us places we could never reach without you.
Remember, we're entering the learning zone. Now, how can we show our respect to the children and teachers who are working?
We can walk quietly.
Yes. Okay, kids, so what I'd like you to do is continue writing your narrative, documenting your emotions if you were the baby owl and your mother abandoned you in the nest.
What can you do? Learn all that you can so that you can challenge us to be our best.
You assisted and assisted them in whatever they needed.
Share yourself with us and show us how to share ourselves with others. Give us courage. Give us compassion. Help us find our own voices so we can become who we are meant to be. Why would you want to sign on it?
Wait, I didn't know you played football.
I'll be back there in a minute. Hang on. Up here. All right, those were extremes, obviously, but we're talking about what it looks like with behaviors, and in terms of how we project to students what they think of themselves and what they think they're capable of learning. So while the written curriculum is the scope and the sequence of the content we want to cover, the other curriculum aspect, which is all the auspices within the learning environment themselves, this idea of learner equity is important. And sometimes we don't realize, even though these were extreme cases in the video, sometimes we don't realize little subtle things that we do. If you, what I want you to be able to do with this as in your role as educational leader, wherever you end up with this degree and do, is to have your platform for which you improve the learning. And I think it starts with this learner equity and opportunity for all kids. I had the unique opportunity back in my teaching career to be involved in a training program called Teacher Expectations and Student Achievement. Had an acronym of TESA, Teacher Expectations and Student Achievement. This was a powerful piece of looking at ourselves in terms of what we do within the environment as adults. And I'll give you the 4 constructs of that program. What we did in this training was to be in teams of 4 with non-common planning periods, so we could actually go in and code each other's behaviors and then look at it from a self-reflection standpoint. And the first construct in learner equity is this idea of distribution of opportunities. We call them equitable. In the TESA language, it was equitable distribution, usually pertaining to questions and question prompts and question responses, but it could be any type of learning activity. What TESA teaches us is that we typically will call on the kids who can answer the questions, because especially if we're being observed, we don't want to look bad in front of the observer. And we typically disproportionately involve kids in that learning experience. And I know you're sitting there probably thinking, like I did when I went into this training, this wasn't me, it was everybody else. Everybody else needed help with this. I didn't. Once we had our partners on our team come in and we gave them a seating chart, we got marks in our seating chart every time we involved a kid in the learning concept. Then we could look at our chart to tell where there were places in the room that we were leaving out. TESA also teaches us that we as teachers tend to teach down the middle of the room and across the front of the room, and we don't get around to the 2 quadrants, the 2 outside areas. My particular experience with that was I had a young man who did not participate very well, and I was teaching math at the time. And I had one of my partners in coding my behaviors and my opportunities for kids. So just so I wouldn't look bad, I called on this young man. His name was Rodney. I asked Rodney a question. Of course, I asked a question, waited 5 seconds, and called the name. If you've been through any of Madeline Hunter's work of giving everybody an opportunity to formulate an answer. Anyway, when I called on Rodney for the question, he looked up and said, "Why did you call on me? You never have before." So he validated to all of us that this was true, that we teach learners what they're capable of learning by the way we behave. So the extremes in this video are setting those mindsets as they get on the bus, go into the building, go into the classroom, and experience the teacher. The second construct of the TESA training was proximity. Research tells us that if we're in a classroom, we should become within arm's distance of all kids an equal number of times. So what this means was if I've got one of my teammates coding my behaviors and I got a seating chart with boxes on it, every time I came within arm's distance, I got a check in that box. What that tells us is we subconsciously teach kids that they are not capable of learning just by our proximity to them. So even if they're in group work, we should be about the room and close enough to all kids the same number of times, because if we slight one, subconsciously they begin to think they're not part of that process. Third construct of TESA was a level of questioning. So our little box chart of our seating chart, every time we ask a more thoughtful, a more difficult kind of question or a problem solving kind of question, we got to check, and it should be an equal number of times. Example I usually use when I talk about this is if I ask one student, when did Columbus discover America or discover the New World, which is a straightforward date, versus to another student, can you tell me the economic conditions in Europe that led to the discovery of the New World? I taught the first child that they were subconsciously, they're not capable of answering a difficult question. And our last construct with equity was a personal regard for all students. So we were coding every time we said something to a student outside the academic structure, like an athlete or a band member or an art exhibit in the hall or something like that. So we showed value. If you really get interested or curious about that, that's based on a book by Jerry Brophy and Thomas Good called Looking in the Classrooms. And it's all about how we as adults drive how kids think they're capable of learning. It's called self-fulfilling prophecy. Part 2 of learner equity is access to resources, especially technology. We've gotten pretty good at making sure everybody's got a one-to-one device, so we've gotten better at that. But all resources and all opportunities for them to experience that technology as well. This gets into one of the constructs of TESA, is that expectation for higher responses and products are distributed equally. So our questioning techniques, and this is where rigor comes into play, what are our stems for questions, and are they involving higher order thinking? And let's see, we got a little video to go with this one as well.
Searching for family vacations? Find you the Burbos. They search millions of amazing vacation homes to find you the perfect pool. Wherever. So, let me tell you about Kai. Great kid, never caused any problems. He perfected this way of hanging over his table and holding his pencil in such a way that if you weren't paying attention very carefully, you would actually think that he was working, which he was not most of the time. Had his hair that hung down in front of his eyes. You know, you could tell that it was nothing personal, but Kai just did not get a whole bunch out of school. One day, for no reason really, I decided to not give the lesson notes in the book, and I decided to ask my students to imagine that a bomb had gone off and all capital letters had been destroyed. Would anybody even notice? And how would we solve that problem? Kai, back of the class, put his hair out of his eyes, raised his hand, and he said, well, we could use different color letters. What a great idea. I finally reached him, and I had no idea what I'd done. But in the moment of contact, I saw real brilliance, and that moment has never left me. It's brought me here today. So, as you've heard, I'm an elementary school teacher, and I think the idea that inspired me the most when I first started teaching was that education is not the filling of a pail or a bucket, it's the lighting of a fire. And we can think back to all of our time at school, and you remember those teachers that really could bring that fire into the classroom for you. And you can remember what it was like to be a student like Kai and just not engage with that education. I have got some ideas about how we can bring that fire back into every classroom every day, and that is what I'm going to talk to you about today. But I'm going to be honest first. because that fire just about went out for me in the last few years. You know, high stakes testing has changed so much of what we do in the classroom. I used to love, when I first started teaching, to spend half a morning reading and writing poetry with my students. But if you want to get through that book and get to everything that's going to be on those tests, as a teacher, you have just got to stick to that schedule. Well, tests are good, but to paraphrase Anya Kamaritz, who is a writer and education blogger, they are like a very, very accurate telescope that are focused on just a few stars at the expense of a universe of knowledge. I like to know how my math lessons are catching on with my students, but I also need to know how they solve their own problems. And I like to hear them tell a joke that they made up themselves. These stars are shining just as bright on our children, and they need to be seen because we don't want them to burn out. And for letting what happens in our classroom be so influenced by external priorities and testing, where is that wonder? Where is that discovery? Where's that fire? Well, I think I got some insight through a pretty special experience, but I had to completely step out of the regular education system in order to get that experience. And I started working in gifted education at the day-a-week school. Now, that is a program for a group of kids, maybe like the top 2%, and they already know or understand pretty much everything that's being taught at school right now. So what you do is you take them out one day a week and you let them have a real challenge. And that challenge is in teaching them how to think. You can look at it this way. These kids already have great test scores. So where can you as a teacher still have something to offer them? Well, in the process. And the process is thinking. And you don't grade what they do there, and you don't test it either. Because something very interesting happens when you stop grading children. Because they can no longer succeed. And they can no longer fail. The only thing they can do is learn. And I don't know about you, but that is a space that I really like to be in. So I'm going to tell you about one of my favorite activities to do with my students. And I ask them to take two objects, like a bus and a pen, and combine them to make a new object. And some kids will think of a pen that looks like a bus, other kids will think of a bus that looks like a pen. But once they get going, they'll start thinking of buses that instead of exhaust pipes have ink coming out of them. And they draw all over town, beautiful drawings every day. And other kids will think of a digital pen that you can put money in, and buses with a sort of board where you can write down where you want to go, and it subtracts the money from the pen. Do you see what I mean? There's no right answer and there's no wrong answer. There is just thinking. And thinking is hard, and thinking can also be really fun. Now, another example, I'm going to share with you a project that I just finished with my kids. I asked them to split up into groups, and I asked them to design original wooden toys. And once they worked out on paper what it was supposed to look like, then they had to make three-dimensional cardboard prototypes. And then from those prototypes, then they learned how to draw them on the computer. And then from the computer, they could get a laser to cut out the pieces of the toys that they designed. But as you can see, it can take a really long time waiting for that laser to cut. So in the meantime, they designed the packaging, and they designed the pricing, and they wrote commercials for their toys. So as you can imagine, some kids really, really enjoyed drawing an original toy, and other kids really loved putting the pieces of a three-dimensional prototype together. And some kids really enjoyed figuring out how much that thing would cost. And other kids loved to write their own commercials. But they all got to do something new, and they all got to do something they liked, and they all felt they had really learned. So what made this learning so different from the learning that they were doing in their own classrooms? Well, learning at primary school happens primarily by understanding, remembering, and applying. So think back to your day at school. The teacher explains a spelling rule or an algorithm so that you can understand it. And then you practice really hard with worksheets so that you can know how to use it. And then at the end, you can spell a word correctly, or you can do an multiplication problem. But there are also three higher order thinking skills. And they are analyzing, evaluating, creating. And that's what my students were doing every step of the way to create their own wooden toys. And that's how I reached Kai too. And now I want to take you someplace new. But I bet a bunch of you are way ahead of me here. If we have the capacity to teach our gifted children like this, shouldn't we be teaching all of our children like this? Because these skills are not just for gifted kids. Creativity, solving problems, making solutions with technology, and working together. These are the skills that all of our kids need. they're going to need them to find a place in the 21st century workplace. Do you realize that it's estimated that kids today at primary school, 65% of them will be doing jobs that don't even exist yet? And how are we going to solve all these problems that we are causing on the earth? We are going to be more and more dependent on young people, like Boyan Slouch, who developed his ocean cleanup project when he was only 18 years old. But even more than that, we can engage all of our learners again, even the Kais. We can get them to love learning now. We can get them to discover what their passions are now. We can get them developing their talents now. And why is this important? Well, civil rights leader Howard Thurman said, don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive. Because what the world needs are people who have come alive. So what will it take to implement higher order thinking skills in our classroom? Not much. It's well within our reach. We can implement activities that stimulate higher order thinking in just 15 minutes a day by using activities like the bus and the pen or riddles. Do you guys know this one? What can travel around the world while staying in a corner? It's a stamp, that's right. Or imagine this, a classroom where just 1 hour a week the books get put away. And one group is in the corner building a chain reaction with dominoes and marbles. It's a huge mess, but it's very cool. And there's another group in the corner that's researching and writing for their website that's to teach other kids how to take good care of their pets. And another group is cutting out the cards for the board game that they've designed and that they're going to teach the rest of the class later. How is this possible? Well, the students I'm talking about have been given the time and support by their teacher to develop something that really interests them. 2 rules. It has to be something that the entire class can learn something new from, and they have to present it when they're done. Does that sound familiar? Well, Google implements it as well, and they call it 20% time. All the employees at Google are allowed to spend 20% of their time at work developing something that really interests them, as long as it is something that may eventually benefit the company as a whole. That's where Gmail came from, and AdSense and Google Sky. It's estimated that as much as half of Google products have originated as 20% from products. Now, I'm not advocating an implementation of a lot of commercial concepts into education, but this one tells me an awful lot about the real kind of development and innovation that happens when you support people going after something they really want to know more about. And you think about what the implications could be for our kids. So how great would it be to implement 20% time in our schools? It's good enough for Google. It's simple, it's cheap. We don't have to buy a bunch of expensive software or training. We can just ask our kids what they want to learn, and we can give our teachers the time and the freedom to support that. But now I'm asking you, what else can we do to create that space where success and failure just fall away and only learning and the joy in learning is left? Which projects that embody the spirit of 20% time will fit into your school, into your classroom? That's why I'm here. I want to start a grassroots movement with schools and parents and maybe even government to start finding answers to those questions. You know, I don't want my daughter to just be seen for the few stars, but I want her to shine for all the brilliance that she has. We offer this kind of education to gifted kids now, but we could be offering it to all of our kids. Imagine a world where everybody, and I'm thinking of those kids we just saw on stage, everybody can be seen for all the light that they have to give. How bright will that world be? Have you got a picture in your head? Well, why don't we go make that happen? Thank you.
All right, what did that propose to you? Maybe you've had some experiences in looking at other classrooms and some things that you've seen, good side, bad side in that. What it got a little far-fetched probably with the discovery and outcomes of that, but she really tells us about what she did with advanced learners, and then began to ask herself why that didn't work with every child. Or some of your own experiences as you were teaching.
Dr. Uri, I struggled to. It was a little bit hard to hear, but I tried to pick through some of what she was saying, and obviously recognize the Bloom's triangle and with the direction she was going. I think back to a teacher that I had in elementary school. Actually, it was in Banner Elk, and she was really, really good at doing those project-based lessons and figuring out how to weave that into her 5th grade classroom, to the point that, and she scored really well too. So she modeled a lot of what what the lady was talking about there. And one of the things that jumped out at me when she said that, she had a child with Down syndrome in that classroom that was on the regular ed curriculum with that group. And she was able to reach that child just the same as she was able to reach the higher level children through that process. And I mean, it was pretty amazing. She was a phenomenal teacher, but she was very, very comfortable in her own skin. She was a facilitator of the classroom, and obviously didn't have any classroom management issues at all. So it was an amazing classroom. I was honored to actually get to work with her. I wish that was something we could bottle up and you'd see it in lots of places, because you don't see it every day. She's very talented. She's a gifted teacher.
So where does it start? What do you think makes that person different? How do we use that to try to cultivate that in more teachers, if not all teachers?
She was so confident in her content, so incredibly confident that she knew that the kids were getting the content. And then she was really good at being able to assess them on the fly too, so she knew that they were learning. Just to be honest with you, I've thought about that a lot, and her level of confidence as a person was probably had a whole lot to do with it. I mean, she was a very professional teacher. That's the only way I know how to put it. She demanded that respect in her classroom, and the kids looked up to her. The community looked up to her. She was passionate about teaching. I don't know. It's hard to wrap your brain around how to bottle all that up and be able to share it out, but she had it.
I think it does start with a disposition and what you actually believe that all kids can do and what you actually believe you're capable of doing with them. So dispositions sometimes are hard to instill or hard to change, but they're so important in terms of making sure that passion is carried out or that passion is lived. That's an excellent example.
Dr. Uri, I also think that it's hard for teachers a lot of times to give up control. And when you are doing some of this teaching that's outside the box, you're having to give up control. Kind of like what we were talking about earlier, where, you call on the kids who are going to give you the right answer because you want, to look like you've taught them and they know the right answer. But I've seen this shift, with at my school where we've talked a lot about students having the productive struggle. That if they've had that productive struggle, then they're really going to get more out of it than just, being able to regurgitate the answer.
Yeah, so the topic in our module for this week was depth of instruction or depth of knowledge or depth of the curriculum. So the depth comes from the being able to plan for these activities to get deep into the content and the thinking part. Mm-hmm. And I think the list of things we had in what we call cheat sheets in terms of the verbs and the question stems is something we ought to practice and something we should talk about. Mm-hmm. I think 3 examples, that's good. Mm-hmm. Classroom activities support development of cultural appreciation. Certainly this varies from system to system and certainly varies within the systems. I know where Tracy works in Montgomery County. I'm fascinated. I will be fascinated to see how this new high school brings 2 different cultures together and certainly will enhance that experience for all kids. But I think some of this was done early on as it was mandated and that kind of thing, but I think it's gotten much more natural for us now. Okay, part 2, standard 2 within these behaviors are classroom routines, a significance of expectations, and this ties right into our level of questions and our equity of higher order thinking. So the strategies themselves are used by teachers to ensure higher order thinking that's driven by the verbs and the question stems, the projects or the learning activities, and then the assessments and how we assess those. They demonstrate a significance of expectations through facilitation, including delving techniques that lead, I got a misprint there, that lead learners, or we duplicated that lead. I'll get that out. That lead learners to increase success of higher order thinking. So a good teacher who can ask good questions certainly has a good start on it, but also we have to be able not to just ask a question and when someone can't answer it, go directly to somebody else. Whether that's giving clues or cues or leading questions or recalling what we've learned before. There's a real art there in being able to do that. I don't remember what this video is about. Let's just see. I hope it ties in like it's supposed to.
If you write anything on your computer, you need to get Grammarly.
All right.
Dr. Yuri,
Yeah.
if you can you try to buffer that or pull it back just a little bit on your end after it starts to play? Just back it up, because on our end, and I don't know if everybody else is I'm getting a lot of feedback on the videos.
So if I cut the
I am
volume,
too.
Yeah.
No, once you when you push play and it starts playing a little bit, just back that little tab up and slow it down where it's buffering ahead of itself.
all right, let me get to the video.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So just move this back. Now cut the volume off.
Focused on the task at hand. When creating goals, that goals are necessary to keep both
Did that
teachers
help?
and students focused on the
Did that
task
help?
at hand. When creating goals, both classroom goals and individual goals for students, teachers must be sure to make them time-bound. That way students do not procrastinate. The problem with a lot of students is that they aren't engaged. Setting goals and providing high expectations will motivate them to learn. So, why do you incorporate high expectations? High expectations and classroom goals must center around academics.
Does
And it's
that help?
probably best to tie goals and expectations to standardized testing. Teachers should physically write out academic goals for students, have them write on papers, have the classroom goals hung as posters in the classroom. After setting goals and high expectations, teachers really have to put their students to work. No goal that has ever meant something was easy to achieve. And then comes the technical end of setting and achieving goals. Teachers have to monitor and assess how the students are doing, and if they're making progress toward achieving their goals. Or the subject expectancy effect. The subject expectancy effect is rooted in hospital settings. Patients go to their doctors after continual illness with little hope of getting better. They expect the doctor to say what other doctors have said, that there is no hope for them. But the doctor tells the patient that he expects them to recover and do absolutely fine. The patient then begins to believe in themselves and believe that they can recover. And this added belief leads to faster recovery. What we are looking to do here is to apply the subject expectancy effect to a classroom setting. There are going to be students that do not believe in themselves. As a teacher, let your students know that you believe that they're going to do well. Hold them to high expectations. I mean, what do you really have to lose anyway? So right now I want to say, subscribe to this channel.
All right, so how does this pertain to our standard of, what I take from this each time I see it is that determining the goals and then determine the essential questions we want to get kids or learners to be able to answer is that we then have planned for those kinds of activities and planned for ways to get to that higher order thinking, and that those expectations of higher order thinking based on the questions we write. So my comment is in observing teachers in classroom is that if the central question for the day is not written in a way that facilitates higher order thinking, then we probably won't get to higher order thinking. And it
And
starts with
something,
goal setting.
Dr. Uri, something that we've really tried to focus on this year is our teachers taking their essential question, or because we have essential questions in reading, but we have learning targets in math, science, and social studies. But at the end of their lessons, they're taking those and actually using it as a formative assessment and asking it as a question to sum up the lesson. And the kids have to submit it as a written response. So we're also practicing those writing skills, even in math, for instance, and they have to incorporate their content vocabulary. And even, you know, some of our lowest children, just being able to answer the essential question, or I mean the learning target, and incorporate that vocabulary into the writing, we are seeing a lot of growth for those children. And we really know they have mastered that skill that's been taught for the day.
Excellent. Are your teachers sharing some of those experiences and what the outcomes actually are achieved with that?
Yes, we have vertical team meetings. We actually had one last Thursday, and that was something we actually discussed. Was teachers are required to bring some examples of student exit tickets from their lessons that incorporated learning targets.
So where you work, I don't have that list in front of me.
Anson County, Peachland-Poton Elementary, Anson County Schools.
Good. Okay, let's see. Higher quality work is recognized by all learners through products and participation. To me, this was one of the hardest things to start getting implemented in the classroom, and it's been a long time since I taught, is getting learners who could distinguish between good learning practices, good activities, good projects, and be able to justify their own work, but also justify the work of the others who did better than they did. So the high quality work then becomes a standard, not just something that we use and not just something using the words. So we recognize it, we assess it, we provide it, but we need to teach our kids how to assess their own work. That builds some student efficacy or learner efficacy along the way.
Dr. Uri, on that one, that's a big push that we have here for our teachers too. One of the things with our PLCs is not as much about. I'm really focused on that product or that outcome of the work, especially at the teacher level. And I think it's actually pushing our teachers to pay a little closer attention in their PLCs, because they know that there's going to be something that they're responsible for, and they're striving to put out a better product because they know we're actually inspecting that product.
That's great.
That's been a little bit of a practice we put in place this past year. And again, you know, if it works for teachers, it worked beautifully in a classroom.
Yeah. I would say save some of those learnings and document some of that stuff, so some of those things and those occurrences, so that you can go back to those and add to that. We talked about rigor last time and rigor principles. It sounds like there's a lot going on out there in your field, and that's good, but we don't have enough going on in all places.
Things to consider. What is rigor and what does it look like in a classroom? Blackburn describes true rigor as creating an environment in which each student is expected to learn at high levels, each student is supported so he or she can learn at these high levels, and each student demonstrates learning at these high levels. So let's talk a minute about how our classrooms have changed and how rigor will appear differently depending on which era or time period that you're actually teaching in. So in the 80s, students would sit at desks. They would have the green chalkboards with lots of visuals of paper that have books and manipulatives on their desks that they've created. There's possibly even a laminator, projector, showing notes and things like that, possibly a computer down here in the classroom, which was very rare. The media center or library may have a few to use. We see cell phones in the 90s being emerged from the bag telephones all the way down to the flip phones. We have data storage on floppy disks to CDs and how that's changed to a classroom today, and the resources that are available where students have their own tablets or specific device that they use, whether it's an iPod, a cell phone, a computer, possibly a smart board by the teacher. Data storage is now available either in USBs or even online where it's free cloud storage through Google Drive. Cell phones have rapidly changed in the amount of technology that they can process and handle. Students can actually collaborate now in a live working space with students across the city walls or even country or states. It is undefined in terms of collaboration that is available to students. So when we think about rigor and what it is, it's really critical thinking. It was those high levels of thinking. So when we define critical thinking, it's an informed decision-making process. You know, it's thinking about thinking and how do we improve it. So you have to be actively analyzing and synthesizing and evaluating a specific process. It has a product of education. It is training and practice, and it's really a mental habit and power. And the greatest sign of success for a teacher is to be able to say, the children are now working as if I did not exist. And that really is the true sense of rigor, is when a teacher can walk away from his or her classroom and the students are still highly engaged in their task and what they're learning about and in their content. And so that's what Maria Montessori, her quote, highly defines critical thinking. On the right side of this slide, you'll see why students and sometimes teachers don't think critically. So these are some potential barriers that limit or put restrictions on critical thinking. Maybe there's just too many facts being thrown out at one time, or there's too little conceptualizing. Maybe it's so much memorizing, rote memory, that there is little thinking that even has to occur, so students are not engaged. Students are trained not to think. Maybe they're just trained to sit there and behave and listen to what is being taught to them without little participation required. And maybe life comes at them fast. Maybe they have home situations or life situations that they are so engaged with in their minds that learning really can't occur until they deal with those. And even as a teacher, we have, sometimes you're in life situations that are causing you to not be able to think as clearly as well. As a classroom teacher, though, when we consider rigor, we have to take action. And these 4 areas, content, process, product, and environment, are really the main cores that need to be considered when you're thinking about raising rigor in your classroom. So we're going to talk about how does this look. At the bottom, you'll see Edutopia wrote an article, Raising Rigor in Your Classroom. This is a fantastic article that goes into a little bit more depth of each of these 4 bullet points that I'm going to highlight for just a moment. For content, when we think about content and being really rigorous, the standards are hard. They're new to students, and a lot of them haven't gone into this curriculum as deep as you have. So it needs to be an approach that really engages them. So that is inquiry-based, that is project-based, that is really allowing them to dig deeper through hands-on, processes, allowing them to work collaboratively, to communicate, and to produce a product. Sometimes that may be a lab, sometimes that may be a project. Sometimes they come up with their own products. Allowing creativity to be fostered in your classroom is fantastic. And really the environment of rigor in your classroom is defined by you. As a classroom teacher, you are the person who is solely responsible for fostering and really igniting this curiosity that will develop, true rigorous students. It was always my aim as a teacher to have students initiate conversations that were really modeling, the high level of Bloom's taxonomy or revised Bloom's taxonomy, really asking those questions without being prompted from me. And we know that as teachers, we are really surrounded by opportunities. So we're going to talk about 5 things that, these opportunities that we have, sometimes we miss or sometimes we respond to in certain ways that diminish the ability of rigor to really take place. So if you're a classroom teacher and you are constantly, shushing your students and you're asking them to be quiet, this begins to be a diminisher of rigor when students aren't able to talk and discuss. And really by making them, requiring them to be quiet is forcing them to be, disengaged from the content, disengaged from the classroom, and ultimately winds up being a result of behavior problems in the class. Students also get a mentality that they're maybe afraid to ask questions. So if you've been ridiculing them for answering or for talking, and they're going to develop this sense of fear in asking questions, which is opposite of the intended goal that you had when you were keeping them quiet. Another opportunity for rigor is when students are actually working by themselves or in groups. You could travel to groups and ask questions for clarification. You can even, ask them another question to really provoke the thought, get them started. So like I said before, you are the leader and facilitator of this environment. If you are showing them how to think and encouraging them in the thoughts that they are having, this is going to help build this. Excuse me. The third thing is having hands-on activities. Students cannot sit still. We're in an age where students are active, they're busy. Our society is filled with things that are constantly going. So if you're having them sit still and quiet, this is not being conducive to who they are as individuals, and it's going to be a defeating purpose. So thinking about rigorous activities, things that are going to get them to think. Allow them to be able to be creative. Avoid simple art projects.
So I think we're maybe overkilling that a little bit. What I'd like to draw attention to in that little video is the rigor found within the content, rigor in the process, rigor in the product, rigor in the environment. We spend so much time with verbs and not so much time. We spend time with verbs. We spend time with question stands. We spend time with assessments. But the content itself has to be at a point whereby there is some rigor indications in the content we use, and the process by which we go about initiating that, and then the products that we ask for bring all those thinking skills together. But most of all, we have to create an environment whereby rigor and expectations are part of what we all understand, even the learners themselves. So to me, and that whole dialogue with her is that concept of where rigor is found more than just in what we have the kids to do. We're probably have not really taken advantage of that opportunity to build an environment whereby the learners themselves value the rigor and value those experiences. Learners direct their own learning with demonstration of a desire to know more. I've talked a lot with teachers who say when a kid raises their hand and says, "What's next? What are we going to do with this?" and they can't wait to get to the next part, it's an indication that we've reached them. We talk a lot about teacher self-efficacy and their confidence to be able to do their job. We're now beginning to talk more about the learner's self-efficacy, and in order to obtain higher order thinking, in order to obtain a higher level of rigor, confidence in being able to do that is important. They have to, and that ability to confidence in their ability to learn is driven by the experiences they have and what feedback they get from it. Being able to be creative and to take risks. So that's part of that rigor environment, that we have to create an attitude that it's okay to take risks. Exhibit behaviors that demonstrate enhanced levels of collective efficacy. So not only self-efficacy of the learner, but collective efficacy of all the learners. This is John Hattie, who wrote the book on collective teacher efficacy.
Good morning, leaders. It's great to be
And he's
here
now
at
working
your
on
conference this
material
morning.
for
Embodiment.
student efficacy.
I'm not sure which part of the world they're in. It's the Where's Wally theme. It is the major theme of your conference is about collective efficacy. And certainly a big hello also to Jenny Donahue, who I know is going to be a key part of your conference over the next 2 days. This topic is really quite an exciting topic. Over the last many years, as I've written and kept the research going on visible learning, I keep adding new influences. And the major reason I do that is that I want to be the first in the world to say I'm wrong. Because if something comes up, for example, that shows class size has a huge effect, I want to be out there and say my model is wrong. Now, so far, that hasn't happened. But a couple of years ago, when the new meta-analysis came out on teacher collective efficacy, and it went to the new number one, it was very comforting. It was very comforting because it supported all the arguments that the visible learning research has been trying to say over the last many years. I think that's a really important part of the theme, is that it is part of the big story. It's not a thing just by itself. And since then, a lot of people have got a lot of interest in this topic. Now, let's be clear. To do a meta-analysis on collective efficacy, there needed to be studies. This is not a new notion. This has been around a long time. There's been a lot of studies out there that have looked at the collective efficacy in schools. But since it's become the new number one, there's been quite a number of books that have been written on this topic. And it seems to be my new job is to take those books and to write a foreword or to write an endorsement. And on 7 or 8 of them, I've refused to do that because they missed the point. A couple of them, including the one by Jenny, who's with you today, is outstanding because they got the message right. So let me talk about this notion of teachers' collective efficacy. It comes back to groups of teachers working together, fed with their evidence of impact. One of the not meanings of collective efficacy is when teachers get together and talk about kids, about curriculum, about resources. That's not the point at all. And it's not just growth mindsets, rah, rah, let's feel good. That's not the message either. This is hard work. This is getting together and understanding how we're going to have impact on students. I'm sure many of you have read the Gonski report that came out a few weeks ago, and it talked about how we can get teachers to talk about a year's growth for a year's input. That's a major focus of teacher collective efficacy. What does that mean? It doesn't mean effect sizes or test scores. It means judgments, interpretations, and how can we do that as a team to understand what a year's growth looks like in the school with these students. Yes, it's very much related to high expectations. And as Christine Ruby Davies' work has shown, teachers do have expectations for the students, and they tend to either have high or low expectations. It's not true that they have different expectations for boys or girls or different kinds of kids. If they have high expectations, they tend to have it for all students. And if teachers have high expectations, they're more likely to realize them. Whereas the teacher down the corridor, they may have low expectations. Unfortunately, they are also extremely successful at realizing low expectations. So what are those expectations? What does that year's growth look like across the teachers in your school and across your schools? How can you look at having those understandings of what you expect over a 10 to 12 week period, bringing along artifacts of students' work over 10 to 12 weeks and saying, is this reasonable growth to expect? And this is putting meat around that sandwich of what a year's growth looks like. It's putting meaning around this notion of what teachers' collective efficacy looks like. And it's having that very strong belief and action that I cause learning. I am the reason why students learn. And I know that sometimes teachers are so nice and they give the credit to the students. It's how the students did the work, or the parents supported them, or the resources were right, or the principal gave me the right time. No, I want every one of you in the room today to say, I cause learning. Because the evidence of visible learning shows that we have an incredible number of teachers that are having that wonderful impact on students and are enabling their students to gain more than a year's growth or a year's impact because of what they do. And the evidence in the visible learning research shows that we have an incredible number of teachers who are having that impact where their students are gaining more than a year's growth for a year's input. And that
We'll stop there. He's talking a lot about teacher collective efficacy, and I wanted to apply that to student self-efficacy, and especially in terms of two concepts, judgments and interpretations. So student learners, their confidence in their ability to learn comes about having good judgments and understanding of judgments and interpreting what they're doing and why that's why it's important to be able to look at each other's work and understand why and how that is an example or exemplar. And collective advocacy is getting together and talking about learning. Our kids talk about projects and talk about processes, but there's not a lot of time spent on what the value of the learning is, just simply from a learning standpoint. And he uses this slogan as teachers being able to say, I cause learning. I think we got to get kids in terms of their self-efficacy to start saying, I caused learning in this classroom. I contributed to what was done here and what was successful here. It's a different environment when we get kids looking at that. Relationships to demonstrate alignment of learning goals and the outcome. Here again, it's about judgments and interpretations of what we see. We've moved on now to number 4, engagement reflects collaboration and vital relationships. This whole concept of peer responses and peer learning and peer led and I cause learning, I help someone else learn, someone else helped me learn. It's a different dialogue and a different jargon in the classroom when we get to this point. The engagement reflects collaboration and vital relationships. Learners make connections from content to real life experiences. So we're getting into that higher order quadrant of what rigorous learning is all about. Learner engagements demonstrate an appreciation of being actively involved. Again, judgments and interpretations of what they're doing.
Writing's not that easy, but Grammarly can help. This sentence is grammatically correct.
On the first day of school this year, I had a little boy get up in my face and he screamed at me. He said, I hate school. I hate teachers. I don't want to be here. I remember taking a calm breath, finding my biggest smile, and I got down on his level and I said, I promise you're going to love school this year. If we take a look at classrooms over the past 70 years, we're seeing the same types of learning environments spanning up to 70 years. It is my goal to continually revitalize learning and the classroom. This is a picture of my classroom in the last school year. I see classrooms differently. These are some of my students. I see my students differently, and I see the way that they learn differently. The results I get are incredible. As teachers and educators, we must embrace the students of today to reimagine tomorrow. First, we must wonder how we can release the power. For as long as schools have existed, teachers have been the main source of knowledge in the classroom. Teachers are the gatekeepers for pretty much everything that happens in the classroom. We're in charge of everything that students do or don't do. As teachers, let's not misuse this power. In 2015, we have far more resources available at our fingertips than ever before. This gives us the ability as teachers to make our classrooms less teacher-centered and more student-centered. Let's embrace that. Teachers don't need to master every single app or every single tool before we hand it over to students. In my classroom, I like to use a students teaching students model. So I will give an app or a tool to a student. I will have them learn how to use it, and then I'll have them go teach all of the other students and myself how to use that app. Teachers don't need to master it all. Let's get kids involved with projects like Genius Hour. Genius Hour is actually based on Google's 20% policy, where kids would actually get 1 hour a week to study things that they are passionate about, instead of telling them things that they have to learn every single day. This really gives kids ownership in their learning, and it makes it very relevant to them. This also means that lots of the time, my students are going to know more than me. That's awesome. Embrace their knowledge, and they'll embrace their learning. Second, we must wonder how we can embrace purposeful technology. Using technology just for the sake of using technology is wasteful. If it doesn't transform your classroom or your teaching or your learning, just skip it, don't use it. If the same project can be done using paper or pencil, it's not transforming your classroom. Always, always, always start with your purpose. If something is boring on paper, it's still going to be boring when you put it on an iPad. Let me tell you what I mean by that. If I give my students a addition worksheet on paper, they are going to think it is mind-numbingly boring. They're going to stare at me. If I take that same addition worksheet and I put it on an iPad, guess what? It's still mind-numbingly boring for them to do. Okay? Boring things on paper are still boring when you put them on an iPad. Even apps have different purposes now. Some apps are skill-based and repetitive, while other apps are actually project-based. Let's turn kids loose to go create something and not just play games. If you actually have to leave your classroom to go to like a computer lab, the technology is not at the point of instruction. Let's get technology in the hands of kids when they need it and where they need it. This is a picture of a little girl in my class that I had this last school year. Her name is Milena. And Milena is following along right now with a classmate's recording of the book that she is reading. She scanned a QR code taped to the back of that book to access this recording. This app transformed my reading block. This app helped instill a love of reading and a sense of pride among my students. Not to mention my reading fluency scores improved exponentially. Third, you must wonder what my mentor once told me. He said, Kayla, don't feed the fears. Schools are still banning cell phones. Principals are still banning cell phones from teacher-staff meetings. Schools are even building what they call these things, cell phone hotels. This is the real thing. Let me tell you how this works. So when kids come to school in the morning, they check their cell phone in at the cell phone hotel. Okay? At the end of the school day, when they're leaving, they go home, they get to check their cell phone back out of the cell phone hotel. We have more technology in the palm of our hands now than what put man on the moon. Yet we're telling our students, leave your technology at home. Keep your mobile device in your locker. Are you hiding a cell phone? Did you check your cell phone into the cell phone hotel? What are we doing? Schools in the United States are still blocking YouTube. Did you know that YouTube is the #1 used search engine among students in grades 5 through 12? This is utterly incomprehensible. So much learning is lost when we block all of these resources from our students. We might think that we're protecting our kids when we keep them in this little bubble for 8 hours of the school day. But guess what? These kids, they leave. They go home. They graduate. They try to get jobs. If we block all these things from them during the school day, we're not protecting them. We're actually hurting them. We need to put kids in real-world learning, authentic environments during the school day and give them the tools that they need to be successful so that we can actually protect them for a lifetime. While jumping into new technologies for social media can sometimes be scary, we need to always keep in mind that if it's right for kids, it's right. Sometimes the comfort level of teachers is less important than doing what's right for kids. My kids have never lived in a time without Wi-Fi or mobile devices. My kids have never felt the pain of T9 texting. They've never had to experience dial-up internet. Technology is the language today's students speak. Furthermore, as educators, it is now our job to be champions of digital citizenship. 93% of employers now use social media in some way to either recruit or hire employees. That means if our students leave us with a neutral or a negative digital footprint, they have just a 7% chance of getting a job. 7%. My friend George Curls challenges us as educators to make sure that every single high school graduate is well Googled. I challenge you to Google yourself. Go have your students Google themselves and like what they see. What does your digital footprint say about you? We must wonder as educators how we can make global connections. It is now our job to make sure that we are connecting our students globally. This probably sounds a lot harder than it actually is. With now with just a few clicks, you can do a virtual field trip to the Smithsonian Institute. Or you can bring your students on a virtual field trip to the Sistine Chapel. Learning is no longer limited to just our classroom or our school or our state or even our planet. You can now take your students on a virtual field trip to the stratosphere. Do a Google Hangout with a classroom in Hong Kong to expose your kids to new and different cultures. Give them the practice that they're going to need with the real life speaking and listening skills of the 21st century. Set up a classroom Twitter account. Have your kids tweet with experts from around the world, like Brad Wade or Jen Jones. Have your kids tweet with other classrooms around the world to share and compare their learning. Don't be the four walls that hold your kids back or limit their learning. Break down those walls and go global. We must wonder how we can reinvent the skills of today. While standardized tests might have a valid place in our schools, we need to start assessing teachers and students in other ways too. Assess my students on their creativity, collaboration, critical thinking, and communication skills. Assess my kids on their grit and how they're able to find success through failure. Assess my kids on their digital literacy skills and other skills that they're going to need when they graduate to be successful employees, citizens, and innovative individuals in the real world. Assess me on how well I prepared my kids for their future when they leave my classroom. While difficult to assess, this should serve as our daily mission. It should guide our teaching and learning values, a compass for a true educational norm. Okay, everyone, here's my challenge for you. We are now 15 years into the 21st century. We need to make sure that our schools and our classrooms are as engaging, responsive, and dynamic as the world around us. Do you remember that little boy that I talked about at the beginning? Well, his name is Christian. He came to me that first day of school, literally wanting to be any place else in the world but my classroom. Well, on the last day of school, Christian was crying out of control. He was refusing to leave my classroom. Why? Because he didn't want to let go of our very last hug. Pretty different than the first day of school. For the first time in his life, Christian loved school. He loved coming to school. He loved learning. He loved everything about being with me. I saw amazing growth, not only in Christian, but in the rest of my students as well. What doesn't often get talked about, though, is the impact that my students have made on my life. Every day, my students taught me about humility and being a real and authentic person. They taught me to have tons of patience. They taught me to have a sense of humor and be able to laugh at myself, and so many more things. Technology changes. The laws that we have will change. The standards that we use to assess our kids are going to change again. But one thing remains constant through time. Relationships between students and passionate teachers will always be the foundation of successful classrooms.
She hit on several of our standards, especially the digital native piece and what it's going to mean to us in that seventh piece. Do you have classes that are connecting with kids around the world or speakers around the world?
We do at my school. One of our teachers is from Scotland, and they have paired up with a sister class in Scotland, and they Skype with them and have done video learning where they're presenting projects to each other. The kids love it.
So it would be interesting to follow that over a period of time too, to see exactly what that does for their desire to learn or inquiry skills or even their own self-efficacy in being able to learn. Let's move a little quicker. Peer and self-monitoring in number 5. Learner-led conferences with peers. Are you doing student-led conferences with parents? Or maybe
I don't think at my current school that we're doing we're not doing student-led conferences. However, at my former school we did, and it was very positive. It was great. Especially really gave the students ownership of their learning, and it was neat because that was actually when I was a teacher. It was neat for my first grade students to just share a piece of writing or something that they had done with their parents, and it was just a really good experience, I think, for the kids and for the parent.
Fantastic. And the feedback techniques demonstrate a value for revising work. So that's part of that rigorous environment we've got into place, that it's okay to revise work. She mentioned grit in her conversation, judging kids' level of grit. How can they take when they make a mistake and build knowledge and understanding from those mistakes? An understanding of content and its relevance. So we've covered rigor, we've covered relationships, and now we have to be able to apply what we're learning to what value it gives us. Learners demonstrate an understanding and appreciation of assessment data and feedback. They know where they rank, they know where they perform, they may even know their growth measures. But the appreciation and the value of that is probably something we need some depth in. Number 6, in relationships, learners demonstrate a respect for peer interactions. Again, if we set that environment up where peer interactions are expected and we understand the value of it. This is interesting. What I've seen, good or bad in this, where learners participate in the development of classroom rules. And I've seen it lead to better support and better behavior. I've also seen teachers who didn't facilitate the process quite as well end up with more gripe sessions and off the wall kinds of comments. Any experiences with that?
I'd have to say I've seen that same thing with a teacher that actually wanted to do that, set her own rules up with the kids, and it wasn't 2 or 3 rules. There were lots of crazy off the wall rules, and it didn't work for her. But I have seen it be very successful.
Yeah, I think you have to really talk about the outcomes of the rules themselves and what the intent of the rules are and what the expectations are. Transitions occurring without interference. Time on task demonstrates a high level of efficiency with effective outcomes. A difficult thing to measure, but an important stress for teachers is making sure there is a high level of efficiency. There is a high level of time on task, not just from quantity standpoint, but the quality itself. And I think some of our speakers have alluded to the digital learning strategies and creating digital natives and using those tools to enhance their overall understanding of not only their world, but the rest of the world. A variety of activities that enhance learning outcomes as well as individual learning styles. And the tool is no stronger than what we plan to do with it. This set of slides, you might want to tweak them a little bit, fit your own flavor, or maybe add some more webinars to this. I think this would be good discussion at BLCs, or good discussion within faculty meetings in a leadership kind of role. Any lasting comments or questions before we? I know it's got a little repetitive, but I don't think we can get overly repetitive in terms of developing a different learning environment for our kids and for our teachers as well. So the depth of our curriculum, which was our module topic, we really got deep into techniques and processes and more dispositions or philosophical beliefs. By next time, you'll have that assignment done where you've looked at a literature source. So we're going to skip next Wednesday. I'm actually going to be out of town. We'll come back 2 weeks from tonight, and I'm going to encourage in an email for everyone to be here. I want you to share a little bit about what you're bringing to all of us, or the rest of us, in terms of what you found that you thought was valuable for us to look at from a curriculum standpoint. So no class next week, 2 weeks from tonight. Be ready to share, and then we'll go ahead and we'll continue down the syllabus with those module topics as well. Okay. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it, and hope you have a good rest of the week. Stay safe. Here's some tough weather tomorrow. Tornado watches and things, so be careful. All right. Good night.
Good night. Thank you, Dr. Uri.
Good night, guys.
Good night.